An abandoned dragon hatchling sold his toys to survive until a human offered him a home. The market of Vorheim never slept. It breathed and roared from the moment the twin suns cracked over the horizon to the deep hours of the night, when the gas lamps lit the stone roads in pale orange. Hundreds of species moved through its narrow streets. Tall Velhari, with their 4 arms carrying bolts of silk. Short, gray-skinned Duskin traders rolling carts loaded with smoked meats and dried roots. Merchants, travelers, refugees, and wanderers, all of them pressed together in the loud and dusty lower district, buying and selling and arguing and moving on. Nobody paid much attention to the small dragon sitting behind the cracked wooden crate near the east wall. His name was Ryok. He was young, barely past the hatchling stage, which in dragon years meant he was still small enough to curl up inside a large barrel. His scales should have been bright gold, the kind that caught light and threw it back like a polished coin. But they were dull now, dusty, the kind of gold that had been left out too long in the wrong weather. His horns were just beginning to grow in, 2 small curved stubs above his amber eyes. His wings were thin and tucked flat against his back, more out of habit than comfort. In front of him, arranged neatly on a square of old cloth, were his toys. There were 11 of them that morning, carved from scraps of pale wood he had found near the carpenter's row. A small bird with spread wings, a round-bellied fish with careful scale marks pressed into its sides, a crouching wolf, a tall tower with tiny windows cut into each floor, a figure of a dragon, smaller than his thumb, with its head raised and mouth open as if mid-roar. He had made all of them himself. His mother had taught him to carve before she left. She had pressed a small iron tool into his clawed hand and guided his fingers along a piece of wood, showing him how to follow the grain, how to let the shape come out rather than force it in. She had said that carving was patience made visible. She had said many things. Then the Great Migration had come. The dragon clans moved every 30 years, following the old route south across the Ashfen Sea toward warmer nesting grounds. It was not a choice. It was simply what dragons did, the way rivers moved downhill, not because they decided to, but because that was the direction everything pulled them. His father had gone first, as the strongest always did, to scout the path. His mother had packed what she could carry. His older clutch siblings, 4 of them, had stretched their wings and waited for the signal. Ryok had been too small. Not weak, his mother had been careful to say that. Not broken, just small. His wings had not finished growing. The crossing was long, and the winds over the Ashfen were brutal. She had looked at him for a long time. Long enough that he had thought she was going to find another way. Long enough that he had started to believe she would stay. She had left him 2 things, the iron carving tool and the small toy dragon she had made for him when he hatched. The only toy she had ever carved, rough and uneven, its tail slightly too long and its wings not quite matching. He had kept that one. He would never sell that one. Everything else was for sale. A Duskin child stopped in front of his cloth that morning, pointing at the carved fish with wide black eyes. Ryok named a price, 2 copper bits, and the child's parent paid without looking at him and pulled the child away. Ryok added the coins to the small pouch tied at his side. He counted what was inside by feel. Enough for 2 nights at the covered alcove he rented from old Bosik, a retired Velhari porter who charged almost nothing but said almost nothing either. Enough for a bowl of grain mash from the street cart at midday. Not enough for anything else. He picked up his carving tool and started working on a new piece. A flat disc of wood he had split from a larger scrap. He was trying to make a face. He had not decided whose face yet. He let his hands work while his eyes watched the street. This was his day, every day. He had been in Vorheim for 4 months. In the beginning, people had stared at him more. A dragon hatchling alone in a market district was unusual enough to draw looks. A few had approached him, asking where his clutch was, whether he was lost, whether he needed someone to report his situation to the district authority. He had told them he was fine. But he had learned early that saying you were fine made people move on faster, and people moving on was sometimes better than people staying. The district authority had come once. 2 Velhari in gray uniforms who had crouched down and asked questions in slow, careful voices. They had offered to place him in a young species shelter on the north side of the city. He had gone to see it once, just to look. It was crowded and loud and smelled like too many different bodies pressed together, and the ones running it had looked at him with the kind of tired patience that told him he would be managed there, not cared for. He had not gone back. He preferred the crate. By midday he had sold 3 more pieces: the bird, the tower, one of 2 small turtles he had made the week before. A female Duskin merchant named Dasa, who ran a dried food stall 2 rows over, walked past and dropped half a flatbread on his cloth without stopping. She did it the same way every few days, not looking at him, not slowing down, as if the bread had simply fallen from her hand by accident. He had stopped trying to thank her. She didn't want thanks. She just didn't want to watch him go hungry. He ate the bread slowly, still carving. The afternoon crowd was thicker. He watched a human pass by at the far end of the row, tall, with broad shoulders and a worn gray jacket, moving with the easy pace of someone who had been in many markets and was in no hurry. He watched humans when he saw them. They were not common in Vorheim. He found them strange and interesting in equal measure. The other species in the market tended to move with clear purpose: buy, sell, leave. Humans seemed to look at things differently. They stopped at stalls they had no intention of buying from, just to look. They asked questions that had no practical use. They made eye contact with strangers. He watched the human disappear into the crowd. He looked back down at his carving. The face on the disc was beginning to take shape. He still had not decided whose face it was. He kept his tool moving, steady and slow, and let the market roar around him, while the twin suns moved across the sky, and his pile of toys grew smaller, one by one, like something counting down to a number he did not want to reach. He had 6 left by the time the lamps came on. He wrapped them carefully in the cloth, tucked the cloth under his arm, and walked back to the alcove. He ate his evening mash. He counted his coins. He curled up on the thin mat Bosik had left in the corner, his tail wrapped around himself, his wings folded close. He did not sleep for a long time. He lay still and listened to the city, which never truly went quiet, and thought about what he would carve tomorrow. It was easier to think about carving than about the other things. The carving had an end you could see coming. You worked toward a shape, and eventually the shape was there, and that was enough. He closed his eyes. Outside, Vorheim kept moving. It always did. An abandoned dragon hatchling sold his toys to survive until a human offered him a home. The east wall of the lower market had its own small world. It was not the kind of place that showed up on the maps the city printed for visitors. It had no official name. The merchants who set up along it every morning had simply been there long enough that the space belonged to them in the way that habit makes things belong, not by paper or law, but by presence. There was Dasa with her dried food stall, always arriving before sunrise to get the corner spot. There was old Pero, a one-armed Duskin who sold second-hand tools from a folding table. There was a quiet Velhari woman named Hessa, who sold hand-dyed cloth, and never spoke unless she was spoken to first. There were others who came and went. And there was Ryak, behind his crate, with his cloth on the ground and his carved toys arranged in a careful row. Not welcomed exactly. No one had invited him or given him a spot, but tolerated. Present often enough that people stopped seeing him as unusual and started seeing him as simply there. The way a cracked stone in the road becomes part of the road after enough time. The other vendors did not talk to him much, but they noticed things. Dasa noticed when his food bowl was empty too many days in a row. Old Pero had once handed him a better carving tool without explanation, just set it down on his cloth and walked away. Hessa had given him a scrap of thick cloth to sit on during the cold weeks when the stone ground pulled heat from the body. None of them made a point of it. None of them asked anything in return. Ryok understood that this was the best kind of help, the kind that did not make you feel like you owed something. He had developed a routine that worked. He woke before the twin suns were fully up, gathered his things, and walked the carpenter's row on the far side of the market, where wood scraps from the previous day's work were swept into piles outside the workshop doors. Most of it was too soft or too splintered to carve cleanly. But if he was early enough, he could find good pieces, dense, pale wood, sometimes with interesting grain patterns, sometimes with a natural curve that suggested something already. He would take what he needed and walk back to his spot. He carved for most of the morning, stopping when customers came. In the afternoons, the market grew busier and more sales happened, so he kept his hands still and his eyes up. He had learned which customers were real and which ones were just looking. The real ones paused in a specific way, not moving on immediately, but not committing either, hovering in that middle space where interest hadn't yet become decision. Those were the ones he spoke to. He just named the piece and its price in a clear, flat voice and let the thing speak for itself. He was not a bad salesman. He had learned by watching. What he had not expected when he first started doing this was that some customers came back. Not to buy every time. Sometimes they just stopped to see what new things he had made. A Duscan couple who had bought the carved tower in his first month came by every few weeks and spent several minutes looking carefully at each piece before choosing. A Velhari boy of about 10 years had bought the round-bellied fish and returned 3 times after that. Once with a friend he seemed to be showing off his purchase to. There was a quiet older woman, species he couldn't identify, pale and thin with large dark eyes, who had never bought anything, but stopped every single time she passed and looked at every piece with an expression he couldn't read. He didn't know what to make of the repeat visitors at first. Then he understood. They were coming to see what he would make next. That realization had done something to him that was hard to describe. It wasn't pride exactly. It was something quieter than pride. It was the feeling of being seen in a specific way, not as a small abandoned dragon selling things to survive, but as someone who made things worth coming back to look at. It was a small feeling, but it stayed. He pushed himself harder after that. He started trying new shapes, more complex ones. A detailed hand, 5-fingered, like a human hand, with every knuckle and nail rendered carefully. A small house with a removable roof, so you could see the single room inside. A bird mid-dive, wings swept back, head pointed down, caught in the exact shape of falling fast. That one had taken him 3 days. He had priced it higher than anything else he'd made. It sold within an hour to a well-dressed Velhari merchant who hadn't even tried to bargain. He made another one the following week. The coin pouch got a little heavier. Not much, but enough to matter. He started eating twice a day, reliably. He repaired a tear in his wing membrane with a paste he bought from a healer's stall. It stung for 2 days, but sealed cleanly. He bought a second mat from Bosick, so the floor of the alcove was softer. Small things, each one taking effort, each one representing a day that had gone right. On the days that didn't go right, he carved. There were bad days, days when the rain came sideways off the bay, and no one walked the lower market. Days when he dropped a piece he'd worked on for hours, and the wing of a carved eagle snapped at the joint, ruining it. Days when other children, alien kids from wealthier families who sometimes wandered into the lower district, gathered near his crate and watched him with the particular cruelty of those who have never had to want for anything, making comments in their own languages he didn't fully understand, but could read perfectly well in tone and expression. On those days he did not look up. He kept his hands moving. He let the wood take the weight of it. His flame was weak. He knew this. It had been weak for months. A dragon's inner fire was tied to more than body temperature. It connected to something deeper, something that required a certain kind of belonging to burn properly. Clutch bonds fed it. Family fed it. Even the bond between a dragon and a trusted companion could sustain it. Without any of that, it faded slowly. He could still breathe a small flame. He checked sometimes, late at night in the alcove, a quiet breath that produced a flickering orange-gold light no bigger than a candle. But it was smaller than last month, and smaller than the month before that. He didn't talk about it. There was no one to talk to. He kept carving. He kept selling. He kept counting coins at night and making plans for the next day that were just specific enough to give the morning a direction. One afternoon, toward the end of a decent selling day, he was working on a new piece, a coiled serpent, its scales pressed in one by one with the point of his tool, when he heard a voice nearby that made him look up. A human, standing at Dasa's stall, holding a wrapped parcel of dried fruit, talking to Dasa in a comfortable, easy way that surprised him. Most non-regulars who stopped at Dasa's stall got 2 words from her at most. This human was getting full sentences. Dasa was even almost smiling, which Ryak had seen maybe 4 times in 4 months. The human was tall, older, somewhere in the middle range of human age, with a broad, weathered face and gray at the sides of his short dark hair. He wore a plain gray jacket, the kind that had been good quality once and had been worn so many times it had settled into the shape of its owner. Work boots, a carry sack over one shoulder. He looked comfortable. Not comfortable like he was rich and everything was easy. Comfortable like he had been in enough difficult places that this particular one didn't worry him. He bought his parcel from Dasa, said something that made her snort, which was the closest thing to a laugh Ryak had ever heard from her, and then turned and walked down the row. He stopped at the crate. His eyes went to the cloth on the ground, to the carved pieces arranged in their row. He stood still for a moment, just looking, the same way the quiet, dark-eyed woman looked, not as a customer calculating value, but as someone actually seeing. Then he crouched down. He was at eye level with Ryak now. He looked at the coiled serpent in Ryak's hands, half finished, then at the completed pieces on the cloth. He did not say anything yet. He picked up the diving bird. Ryak had made a second one, and turned it over carefully in his fingers, looking at the underside, the way the wingtips had been tapered. "You made all of these?" he said. His voice was even, not the over-careful voice people used when they were trying not to seem unsettled by a dragon. Just a regular voice, asking a regular question. Ryak nodded. The human turned the bird over once more, set it back down gently, in the same spot it had been. "How much for all of them?" he said. Ryak looked at him. In 4 months, no one had ever asked to buy everything at once. An abandoned dragon hatchling sold his toys to survive, until a human offered him a home. His name was Tay. He had been in Vorheim for 2 days on a freight contract, a standard run, delivering sealed containers from the orbital station down to the city port, and picking up a return load scheduled for the end of the week. It was the kind of job he had been doing for 11 years, unremarkable on paper, which suited him fine. Unremarkable on paper usually meant no complications, no one shooting at you, and enough coin at the end to cover the next 2 months of fuel and docking fees. He had wandered into the lower market on his second afternoon, because wandering was what he did in new cities when he had free hours. He had learned more useful things about a place by walking its cheaper districts than by sitting in the approved visitor areas near the ports. The lower market of Vorheim smelled like dried fish and wood smoke and something floral he couldn't identify. And it was loud in the comfortable way of places that were too busy to be dangerous. He had stopped at the dried food stall because the woman running it had the kind of no-nonsense efficiency he respected. She had given him a fair price without being asked, and hadn't tried to upsell him on anything. While she wrapped his parcel, he had made a comment about the quality of her stock, and she had surprised him by responding with an actual opinion instead of a merchant's deflection. They had talked for 3 minutes. He had made her snort at something. That was enough to make it a good afternoon. Then he had turned and seen the dragon. Not immediately. He had started walking the row, and his eyes had passed over the crate the way eyes pass over familiar shapes. Just another vendor spot. Just another display cloth. Then something had snagged his attention and pulled it back. The toys. They were not what he expected from a street stall. He had seen carved wooden pieces in 100 markets, and most of them were the same shapes repeated in the same ways. Simple animals, basic geometric forms, work fast enough to produce in volume and sell cheap. These were different. The diving bird alone would have looked at home in a proper craftwork shop on an upper district street. The detail in the serpent being worked on, still unfinished, still in the hands of whoever was making it, was the kind of thing that required patience and skill in equal measure. He had crouched down. The hatchling looking back at him had dull gold scales and eyes that were very steady and very careful. Not frightened, not hopeful. Just watching, the way something watches when it has learned that most things that approach either want something from you or will move on without mattering. Tay had looked at the bird in his hands and felt something settle in his chest that he recognized as the particular feeling of being in the presence of something genuinely good. "How much for all of them?" he had said. The hatchling had been quiet for a moment, working something out. Then he had named a total, a fair number, not inflated, just the individual prices added together. No discount for volume, no apology for the amount, just the number, stated plainly. Tay had paid it. He had watched the hatchling's face while he counted out the coin. There was a flicker of something, not surprise exactly, more like the expression of someone who had prepared for one outcome and was quietly recalibrating to another. Tay stacked the pieces carefully in his carry sack, wrapping the more delicate ones in the cloth from his parcel. The hatchling watched each piece go in with an expression that was controlled and neutral, but that Tay, who had spent a long time around beings of many species, could read underneath. It was the expression of someone watching things leave that mattered to them. "These are good work," Tay said, straightening up. "I mean that." The hatchling nodded once, didn't say anything. "What's your name?" Tay said. A pause, not suspicious, just weighing something. "Ryok," the hatchling said. "Tay," he said back, and he did not offer a hand, because he had noticed that the hatchling had not moved toward him at any point during their exchange, and Tay had learned long ago that the gesture of respect was not the same for every species. For some, you moved toward. For some, you waited. He waited. Then he picked up his carving tool and went back to the serpent. Tay walked back to his dock. He set the carved pieces out on the small fold-down table in his ship's crew cabin and looked at them for a while. He wasn't a collector. He had no particular attachment to objects. His ship, the Pale Gannet, was functional and clean, and contained almost nothing that wasn't useful. But he lined the pieces up along the table's edge, and found that they looked right there, like they had always belonged in that specific light. He thought about the hatchling for the rest of the evening. He had seen orphaned young of various species in the markets of different worlds. It was not uncommon. The galaxy was large, and migrations happened and wars happened, and simply, parents left sometimes. The mechanisms varied. The result was often the same: a small creature in a too large place, surviving on whatever could be found, or made, or sold. Most systems had shelters of some kind. Most shelters were not enough. What stuck with him about Ryok was not the sadness of the situation. It was the composure, the careful arrangement of the cloth, the fair prices, the quality of the carving, which spoke of hours of disciplined work done alone, without anyone watching or encouraging. The way he had said his name, not small, not quiet, but measured, like someone who had decided that the only thing he could control was how he carried himself, and he was going to control that, precisely. Tay had known grown adults, human and otherwise, who had never developed that quality. He went back to the market the next morning. Ryok was already there when he arrived, the cloth laid out, 3 new pieces finished overnight. A small sitting fox, a flat disc carved with a face that was almost human, and a third piece he was still working on. He looked up when Tay stopped at the crate. His expression was neutral, but not closed. Tay bought the fox. He didn't need it. He bought it because it was worth buying, and because it gave him a reason to crouch down again. "You work through the night?" he said. "Sometimes," Ryok said. "Sleep somewhere near here?" A pause. The hatchling's amber eyes measured him. "Alcove on the south side. I rent it." Tay nodded. He sat down on the ground beside the crate. Not in front of it, not blocking the stall, just to the side. He pulled the fox out of his jacket pocket and looked at it. The tail had been carved in 3 separate sweeping lines that somehow read as movement, even in still wood. "How long have you been here?" he said. 4 months, Ryok said. "Alone?" Ryok looked at him. The question was direct, and Tay had meant it to be. Not to wound, just because he didn't see the use in circling around things. "Yes," Ryok said. His voice was even. They sat in something that wasn't quite silence, because the market was loud around them. But between the two of them, it was quiet. Tay did not fill it with words that weren't needed. He had learned that too, over the years. Silence between strangers is not the same as silence between people who have decided to be in the same place on purpose. The second kind was worth something. After a while, a Duskin woman stopped to look at the disc with the face on it. Ryok spoke to her, still and clear, named the price. She bought it. Ryok added the coin to his pouch and went back to carving. Tay watched him work. The carving tool moved in short, controlled strokes. Ryok's claws, which could have made the tool difficult to manage precisely, had been adapted to it, held at an angle that gave him leverage without sacrificing control. He had figured that out himself. There was no one to show him. He had simply worked until the grip was right. Tay did not say anything else for a long time. When he stood to leave, Ryok looked up. "You'll come back," Ryok said. The question was flat, not hopeful, just asking a thing that was in the air. "Tomorrow," Tay said. Ryok looked back down at his carving. His tail, Tay noticed, shifted slightly, a small, involuntary curl at the tip, there and then gone. Tay walked back through the market, with the carved fox in his pocket, and the carved serpent, finished now. He'd have bought it on the way out, wrapped in cloth under his arm. He passed Dasa's stall. The old merchant looked at him with narrow eyes. "You buying his things?" she said. Not a question. "Yes," Tay said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to stacking her parcel jars. "Good," she said. Tay kept walking. Tomorrow, he thought. And then he thought about the alcove on the south side, and the thin mat, and the twin suns going down over Vorheim, and a small dragon counting coins alone in the dark. He walked a little faster. There was something he needed to think through. He didn't have all of it yet, but it was forming. An abandoned dragon hatchling sold his toys to survive, until a human offered him a home. Tay came back the next day, and the day after that. He didn't make a show of it. He arrived in the morning, bought something, always something, never nothing, because he had figured out quickly that arriving empty-handed felt different from arriving as a customer, and then sat beside the crate for a while. He didn't ask heavy questions. He didn't crowd. He brought food on the third day. 2 portions of the warm grain wraps sold at a stall near the port gate, wrapped in paper to keep the heat in, and set one down beside Ryok's cloth, without comment. Ryok looked at it. Then he looked at Tay. "I didn't ask for food," Ryok said. "No," Tay said. "I bought 2 and I can only eat 1. Ryok looked at the wrap again. Then he picked it up and ate it. He did not thank Tay, but he ate the whole thing carefully and without rushing, and when he was done, he went back to carving with a slightly more settled look about him than before. Tay counted that. On the 4th day, Tay brought 2 wraps again. This time Ryok took his without looking up from his work, which Tay understood as a different kind of acknowledgement. The kind that meant the thing had been accepted into the routine, which was more than just tolerance. They talked more as the days passed, not deeply, but steadily, the way you build something when you're not rushing, one layer at a time, letting each one set before adding the next. A mid-size freighter, nothing special to look at, built for hauling rather than speed, but reliable and well-maintained, and as Tay described it, a good ship in the way that certain tools are good, not because they are beautiful, but because they do exactly what they are supposed to do, and keep doing it without complaint. It had a crew cabin, a small kitchen unit, a cargo hold that took up most of the body, and 2 extra quarters that had been empty for the last 3 years, since he had stopped taking on crew for long runs. Ryok asked about the routes, the places he had been. Tay described them, station ports and orbital platforms and surface cities on a dozen worlds, all of them different enough to be interesting and similar enough in the important ways that once you knew how to navigate one, you could find your footing in any of them. He described the people he had met, the jobs that had gone smoothly, the ones that hadn't. He did not make it sound romantic. He made it sound real, which was better. Ryok listened. He asked occasional questions, short, specific ones, the kind asked by someone who was actually processing what they heard, rather than just waiting for a gap to speak. He asked what the stations were like at night. He asked whether the cargo ever got interesting. He asked once, looking down at his work, whether Tay had ever been somewhere with no other ships around. "Deep run once," Tay said. 3 weeks between ports, nothing on any channel, just the ship and the dark. "Was it quiet?" Ryok said. "Very." "Was it bad?" Tay thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "It was actually fine. The quiet was clean, I suppose. Nothing pretending to be anything." Ryok was still for a moment. Then he went back to carving. They did not speak for a while after that. But it was a different kind of silence than the early ones. Less tested. On the 5th day, Tay did not show up in the morning. Ryok did not let himself think about it. He laid out his cloth. He arranged his pieces. He worked. Customers came. He sold. The morning passed. At midday, he ate alone. He noticed that he had been eating better this week than any week in the past 4 months, and that the wraps had done something to his energy that the grain mash from the street cart simply had not. He did not think about why he noticed this. He worked on a new piece. A small, clenched hand, a human hand this time, knuckles pressed together, which was technically harder than an open hand, and he wanted the difficulty. Tay arrived in the early afternoon. He sat down beside the crate. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from thinking, not from work. He had a second wrap in his jacket pocket, and he passed it to Ryok, who took it and ate without comment. They sat for a while. Then Tay said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear the whole thing before you answer." Ryok put his carving tool down. He looked at Tay directly. Tay took a moment to line up his words. He had spent the morning doing this, not performing it, but actually working out the right order so that it said what he meant, and nothing it didn't mean. "I dock at Heron 4 Station between runs," he said. "I've got a berth there, a home dock, small but permanent. There are 2 empty quarters on my ship that have been empty for years. I work the same routes, the same cycles, and I come back to Heron 4 between each one." He paused. "I don't have family. I don't have people waiting for me. I have a ship, and a berth, and work that I'm good at, and that has been enough." He stopped for a moment. "I'm not saying it hasn't been enough," he said carefully. "I'm saying there is room. Room in the quarters, and room at the table, and room for things that aren't mine if they needed a place to be." Ryok watched him. "I'm not offering you charity," Tay said, and his voice was level and clear. "I want to say that straight, so there's no confusion. I'm offering you a place, a real one, on the ship, and at the dock, and on the routes if you want to come, or at the berth if you don't. I'm not asking anything back from you, except to be there, to be part of it." He stopped. "I'm offering you a home, Ryok, because you don't have one, and you should have one. And because I have been thinking about it for 5 days, and I can't think of a single reason that makes sense why you shouldn't." Ryok did not say anything. Vendors called prices. Someone's cartwheel squealed against the stone road. The twin suns were moving toward the midpoint of the sky, which meant the afternoon crowd would thicken soon. Ryok looked down at the cloth in front of him, at the pieces arranged there, at the small pouch of coins at his side, at the carving tool in his still hand. Then he looked at the last toy he kept under the cloth. Always under the cloth, never for sale. The rough little dragon his mother had made, its slightly too long tail, its uneven wings. He looked at Tay. Tay was not leaning forward. He was not performing eagerness. He was sitting the same way he always sat, easy and settled, not pushing, not pulling, waiting in the way that said the waiting was fine, that there was no pressure attached to the answer, except the answer itself. Something in Ryok's chest shifted. It was not dramatic. It was a small movement, deep down, like a weight that had been in one position for so long you had stopped feeling it as a weight, and had started feeling it as simply the way things were. And now it had moved, just slightly, and you realized what it had been. His flame, small and flickering, gave a single quiet pulse. He felt it, and said nothing about it. "I need to think," he said. "Take the time you need," Tay said. "I'm not saying no," Ryok said. "I know," Tay said. They sat for another hour. Ryok sold 2 more pieces. Tay watched the street. The afternoon crowd came, and thickened, and thinned again. When Tay stood to leave, he put a hand briefly on top of the crate, not on Ryok, just on the wood, near him, and then walked away through the market, without looking back. Ryok watched him go. He picked up the rough little toy dragon from under the cloth. He turned it over in his clawed hands. He looked at the uneven wings. His mother had made this in a hurry, probably, or while distracted, or maybe just before she was quite good enough at it. But she had made it, and she had left it for him, and he had carried it through 4 months of this city and never let it go. He held it for a long time. Then he put it back under the cloth, gently, and picked up his carving tool, and went back to the human hand he had been working on. The small, clenched fist, knuckles pressed together, harder than an open hand. His claws moved, careful, steady. Outside, Vorheim moved, and breathed, and roared. Inside him, something small and golden held its light. An abandoned dragon hatchling sold his toys to survive, until a human offered him a home. Ryok did not sleep well that night. He lay on his mat in the alcove and stared at the low ceiling and turned Tay's words over the way he turned a piece of wood before he began carving. Slowly, from every angle, looking for the grain, looking for what was already inside it before he added anything of his own. A place. A real one. He had not let himself want something like that. Wanting things you couldn't control was expensive. It cost energy you needed for other things. He had learned this in the first weeks in Vorheim, when he had still gone to sleep hoping that the next day would bring something different, and woke up to find that the market was the same, and the crate was the same, and the coin pouch was the same weight as before, and nothing had arrived to change things, except whatever he changed himself. After enough of those mornings, he had simply stopped waiting for a change that came from outside. He had stopped wanting in that direction. And then Tay had sat down beside his crate and asked his name like it was a normal question, and brought food without making it into something, and come back again. Ryok lay on his mat and thought about the empty quarters on the Pale Gannet. 2 of them, sitting empty for 3 years. He thought about Heron 4 Station, which he had never seen, and the home dock Tay had described. Small, he had said, but permanent. Those 2 words, small and permanent. He turned them over. Small didn't bother him. He had been living behind a crate for 4 months. But permanent was a different kind of word. It assumed a future that included the same place, the same door, the same ceiling above you when you looked up. He had not had that since before the migration. He thought about the rough little toy dragon under his cloth, about his mother's hands pressing it into his, about the way leaving looks the same from both sides, the one who goes and the one who stays, both watching a shape move away until it disappears. He had been the one who stayed. He knew that shape well. But this was different, a part of him said. This was not someone leaving. This was someone offering to stay, or to bring him along, or both. He closed his eyes. He did not make the decision in the dark. He let himself sleep finally, and he woke with it already made, the way some decisions settle overnight, when you stop pushing on them, and let them land where they're going to land. He let Tay wait 1 full day, not to be difficult. Not out of pride, exactly. Though pride was part of it, the quiet kind that a creature keeps when it has learned that the only reliable constant is itself. He waited 1 day because he needed to be sure that what he felt in the morning was the same thing he had felt at the end of the night, and that neither feeling was just relief pretending to be certainty. It was the same. On the second morning, he packed his things. There was not much. The mat he left for Bosik, because Bosik had charged him almost nothing, and deserved something back. The carving tool he wrapped in a strip of cloth, and tucked into the small bag his mother had given him. The same bag he had arrived in Vorheim with, which had held almost nothing then, and held only slightly more now. He took the cloth he had spread on the ground every morning, and folded it precisely. He took the toy dragon last, held it for a moment, then placed it at the top of the bag, where it would be easy to reach. He went to the east wall 1 last time. He set up the cloth. Not to sell. He had nothing left to sell. He just put it down in its place, in the spot that had been his for 4 months, and sat with it for a little while. The market was just starting up. Dasa was setting out her jars. Old Pero was unfolding his table. Hessa was arranging her bolts of cloth in the early light. Dasa looked over at him, then at his bag, then back at him. Ryok met her eyes and nodded once. Dasa looked at him for a long moment. Her expression did not change much. She was not a soft-faced woman, and she had not survived decades of market trading by showing what she felt at inconvenient times. But something shifted at the corners of her eyes. She reached behind her stall and took out a small package, walked over without hurrying, and set it beside him on the cloth. Dried fruit and a strip of cured meat, wrapped in paper. "For traveling," she said. That was all. He did not trust his voice right away. He looked at the package. He looked up at her. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it." She made a sound that was not quite a dismissal, and not quite an acknowledgement, and walked back to her stall. Which was, he had learned, how she accepted things. Old Pero raised a hand when Riok passed his table. Hessa looked up from her cloth, and nodded. A full, deliberate nod, not the half-nod of a brief greeting. He nodded back. He found Tay at the port gate. Tay was leaning against the wall with his carry sack over one shoulder, and the easy patience of someone who had not doubted the outcome, but had not assumed it, either. He stood up straight. They looked at each other. "All right," Riok said. Tay smiled. Not a large smile, not the kind that needed to announce itself, just a real one, reaching his eyes, the kind you get when something has gone the way it should. "All right," he said. They walked through the port gate together. The Pale Gannet was docked at Bay 14, a middle berth on the working side of the port, where freight ships were loaded and cleared and sent back out without much ceremony. It was exactly as Tay had described, functional, clean, carrying the quiet dignity of a thing that had been well cared for over a long time. The hull was a faded pale gray with a gannet bird painted on the nose, simple and white, wings level, gliding. Riok looked at it. It was not the largest ship in the port. It did not try to be anything other than what it was. He thought that was the right kind of ship. Tay walked him through it. The cargo hold, the kitchen unit, the crew cabin where his carved pieces were still arranged along the fold-down table, which made something catch briefly in Riok's throat. Tay showed him the two empty quarters. They were small, clean. The second one had a narrow shelf along the wall, and a window port that looked out to the side of the dock. Tay did not say, "This one is yours." He just stood at the door and let Riok look at it. Riok walked in. He stood in the middle of the room and felt the floor under his feet, solid, ship metal, the slight hum of the power systems running through it. He looked at the shelf. He looked at the window port, through which he could see the side wall of the next berth and a strip of sky above it. He took out the rough little toy dragon and set it on the shelf. He stepped back and looked at it there. It fit, not because the shelf was made for it, just because it was there, and things that are placed somewhere with care tend to look like they belong. That night, after Tay had made something to eat in the small kitchen, and they had sat at the fold-down table and eaten together without needing to fill every moment with words, Riok went to his quarter and sat on the bunk. The port was quiet outside. The ship hummed low and steady around him. He breathed out slowly. The flame that came was small, smaller than it should have been for a dragon his age, but it was warm and gold, and it lit the corner of the room in a way that was soft and steady, rather than flickering. It did not gutter. It held. He looked at it. He had tried not to think about that too directly, the slow fate of it, the nights in the alcove when he checked and it was smaller again, and he had put that fact away in the part of him where things lived that he could not afford to sit with for too long. He had kept going because stopping was not something he was built for, but he had known. He looked at the flame. He heard a quiet knock at the door. He closed his mouth, and the flame went out. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Come in." Tay opened the door and looked in. He looked at the corner where the light had been a moment ago. Then, at Riok. "Saw light under the door," he said. His voice was easy, not making anything of it. Riok looked away. His tail moved, a small involuntary curl at the tip that he did not catch in time. "Just checking the room," Riok said. He stood in the doorway for another moment, and the expression on his face was the same one from the market, the steady, unbothered kind, the kind that did not require anything back. "Good night, Riok," he said. "Good night," Riok said. The door closed. Riok sat in the dark for a while. The toy dragon was a small shape on the shelf. Outside, Through the window port, the strip of sky was dark and full of stars. He breathed out again, slower this time, steady. The flame came back, warm and gold, filling the corner. He looked at it, and this time he let himself look for as long as he wanted. He did not put it away. He did not check how big it was, or compare it to what it had been. He just looked at it, burning quiet and steady in the corner of a room that was his, on a ship that was going somewhere, beside a man who had simply stopped. Somewhere in the galaxy, his clutch had moved on. His mother was somewhere south across the Ashfen Sea, carving shapes in warmer nesting grounds. His older siblings were growing into their wings. He was here. He had a shelf, he had a window, he had warm food, and a floor that hummed, and a door someone knocked on before entering. He had a home. The flame held.